You are currently accessing a classified Foundation Threat Assessment briefing. Today, we are reviewing the parameters, timeline, and residual anomalies associated with SCP-3935. The information contained herein is strictly restricted to personnel with the appropriate clearance level. Please ensure your localized auditory monitors are functioning correctly before we proceed. We are going to analyze the anomalous phenomena that fundamentally altered a localized population.
For incoming containment specialists, the threat assessment docket we're covering today is structured as follows. 1. Containment and spatial properties. 2. The timeline of paranormal escalation. 3. The Friday spatial trap. 4. Entity taxonomy. And 5. Cognitive and auditory threats.
Section 1. Containment and spatial properties. Operation Salvation.
The physical containment protocols for this location are absolute. We've erected a 2-kilometer quarantine zone around the center of Salvation, Indiana. Total civilian evacuation was implemented, resulting in a population of roughly 1,400 individuals being permanently relocated. To maintain operational secrecy, we are actively disseminating cover story 3935.18, which cites a hazardous waste disaster in the area. Due to extreme environmental hazards, any subterranean exploration is currently forbidden to all but Class D personnel.
Regarding the anomaly itself, SCP-3935 is defined as an extratemporal, extraspatial, non-Euclidean space. The primary access point is located exactly 25 meters beneath a collapsed section of the subbasement, directly under the Salvation High School swimming pool. Its internal geometry is impossible.
Hello?
The anomaly's influence extends far beyond that physical origin point, having fundamentally contaminated the entire town.
At the threshold of this anomaly, our researchers discovered a small antechamber containing a buried stone arch. Inscribed on this arch is a phrase not found in any known literature. It reads,
"The way below winds deeper, longer, unspeakable its patterns laid. The lost forever damned to wander, this thing a quiet madness made."
The origin of this architecture remains under active investigation. Section 2. The timeline of paranormal escalation as documented by the UIU Field Report from June 1976. The primary anomalous activity occurred during the week of June 18th. On Sunday, students began reporting voices trying to speak from beneath the ground. By Monday, a third voice began speaking unintelligibly beneath the standard lunch announcements, and students noted their mirror reflections had become completely faceless. Moving to Tuesday, 9 female figures hanging by ropes were observed near a flagpole. Later, in a biology class, a student's eyes rolled back before he phased completely through the solid floor, only to reappear later dropping from the ceiling. Escalation continued geometrically as the week progressed. On Wednesday, the high school inexplicably flooded with 2 inches of water. A dark figure was witnessed walking upward through the air at an impossible angle until it vanished. By Thursday morning, the entire school physically shifted 1 foot off its foundations. During this structural anomaly, the boys' locker rooms entirely disappeared, replaced by what witnesses described only as something that screamed. That afternoon, 9 young women were observed suspended 25 meters in the air above the parking lot, silently mouthing words. Section 3. The Friday Spatial Trap, detailing the June 23rd mass event. Upon arriving at school that Friday, the students were drawn inside. The interior space had become entirely non-Euclidean. Moving toward the back of the building invariably directed them downward, deep into the earth. The entire mass of students was suddenly teleported outside the spatial pocket and encased in solid rock and earth for 20 seconds. Following this burial period, they manifested in the sub-basement, where they were subjected to distinct subterranean visions. These included a weeping woman digging until her hands rotted away, and a burning farmhouse surrounded by hanging figures. Immediately following these hallucinations, the students were instantly displaced back to their respective civilian residences. Section 4. Entity Taxonomy. We will now review the classified threat actors. Our taxonomy isolates 3 primary threat actors from the event. First, the 9 women. These are visually unremarkable female figures hanging by ropes. They were observed silently mouthing words, though they began screaming upon their Friday manifestation. Second, the black humanoid. A small, dark, human-shaped form exhibiting erratic, spasmodic movements. It is entirely capable of phasing through solid matter. And finally, the syncope student, an unknown entity carrying a purple satchel with the word syncope embroidered on it. This entity exhibits strong anti-mimetic properties, meaning witnesses are completely unable to recall any of its facial details after observation. Section 5. Cognitive and auditory threats, and the implementation of Chemical 110. During the outbreak, the entire school reported hearing a voice whisper this singular word into their right ear at exactly 7:56 in the morning. This auditory hazard, repeated later that afternoon, broadcast from beneath the ground in a child's voice to the majority of town residents.
Hello.
It is classified as an objective threat datum.
To conceal the sheer scale of the outbreak, the Unusual Incidents Unit administered an early model amnestic known as Chemical 110. This substance is highly toxic and causes severe damage to human memory centers. In a 2002 Foundation interview, former English teacher Mrs. Valerie Fletcher clearly demonstrated this cognitive decay. Her ability to discern reality from the anomaly was completely shattered. She frequently succumbed to the localized auditory interference, interrupting her own testimony to address a voice only she could hear.
This briefing concludes with a critical anomaly parameter that requires ongoing investigation. Foundation threat analysis has highlighted a persistent mathematical discrepancy. During her interview, Mrs. Fletcher identified the 9 hanging female figures from photographs, stating they were the high school's cheerleading squad. However, she also confirmed that there were 10 cheerleaders on the squad. If 9 are accounted for as anomalous entities, where is the 10th?
Briefing terminated.
A quick message. Accessing these archives requires Level 3 clearance. Ensure your credentials are updated by hitting the subscribe button to stay informed on future containment breaches. Back to the video.
Attention, Level 4 security personnel. Close the doors and take your seats. I am your designated intelligence officer for today, and this is a mandatory operational explainer of our protocols regarding a highly volatile anomaly. My job is to make absolutely sure you grasp the severity of what we have locked downstairs. We aren't here to guess or speculate. We are here to understand the facts, the physical threat, and the non-negotiable containment mandates. Let's get right into it. We have 5 main items on the agenda today. We'll start with the special containment procedures, then move into a threat description and review the historical transfer incident. After that, we'll analyze the current subject profile and finally conclude with your final directives. Section 1. Special Containment Procedures. Right now, the host is housed in a 5x5 meter containment cell, which features a raised graded floor, and trust me, that is not for his comfort. That floor connects directly to a constant high-powered vacuum system. This is absolutely crucial to clear the anomalous biological buildup that constantly manifests around him. Every single creature sucked out of that cell via the vacuum goes straight to incineration, except for a tiny fraction we pull daily for necropsy. Guarding this host requires some very specific prerequisites. We mandate a minimum of 2 monitoring personnel on duty at all times. Those guards are armed with tranquilizer guns, and they have standing orders to put the subject down if he gets erratic or if the physical situation goes south. On top of that, any security staff on this rotation has to be fully inoculated against all known animal-borne pathogens. Because you have to remember, you're not just guarding a man down there, you are guarding a walking epicenter of disease. Section 2. Threat description for SCP-027. So what exactly is SCP-027? It's a phenomenon of completely unknown origin, inextricably tied to a single human host at any given time. What this connection does is create a constant, involuntary attraction of swarming vermin directly to wherever the host is. The anomaly itself isn't a tangible creature you can shoot or trap. It's essentially an inescapable gravitational pull for pests, currently anchored to a human being. You need to understand this behavioral dynamic. The host has zero control over the swarm. None. Do not mistake this for some kind of symbiotic relationship or superpower. These are feral specimens acting purely on base instinct. They attack the host constantly, biting and scratching him relentlessly, and they pose an indiscriminate, completely feral threat to anyone who gets too close. To give you an idea of how fast this happens, look at this timeline. If the host stays in one spot for just 2 to 3 minutes, a literal cloud of flying insects, mostly gnats and flies, starts to form. Shortly after that, the crawling pests show up. We're talking lice, cockroaches, spiders, and worms. And finally, the mammals start to congregate, primarily mice and rats. The longer he stands still, the bigger and deadlier the swarm gets. Section 3. The Transfer Incident. Our timeline here begins back in the late 1990s when we discovered the original host, Subject 027-01, in an abandoned, completely vermin-infested warehouse. We had him contained for several years, but in the 2000s, he expired in our custody. What happened next is a massive intelligence failure that we absolutely cannot repeat. Roughly 140 to 150 hours after his death, Foundation Security Officer KF was involuntarily infected. The physical toll this anomaly takes is absolute. When we autopsied the original host, 027-01, we found that over 70% of his body had been compromised. And I mean severely compromised. Medical examiners actually found a colony of rats nesting right inside the subject's abdomen. A colony that had been actively breeding in there for multiple generations while the man was still alive. Which brings us to a rather grim comparison. Subject 027-01 was a civilian casualty, a man who suffered severe mental and physical degradation before he died. But Subject 027-02, our current host, he was one of our own. Security Officer KF was reclassified as Subject 027-02 after he went to medical complaining of breathing problems. Turns out, a housefly had crawled up his nasal cavity and laid eggs while he was sleeping. The anomaly had officially transferred. Section 4. The Psychological Profile of Subject 027-02. During interview 02721, the subject made a frantic plea to our primary researcher. He literally said, "I feel dirty and scared, and Doc, what about my family? You gotta get this thing out of me so I can see them again." It clearly highlights his profound psychological distress, paranoia, and the agonizing realization that his isolation is permanent. In that exact same interview, Dr. Jameson pushed him with a very specific line of questioning. He asked, "Do you feel anything different inside you, like a presence?" The goal there was to figure out if the anomaly actually has a conscious entity attached to it, or if it communicates with the host through internal voices or compulsions. But the subject's response confirmed our current baseline. He was highly agitated and said, "No, I haven't felt anything except bugs crawling all over me." So, he feels no anomalous entity. There's no grand intelligence talking to him in his head. For him, it's just the relentless, waking nightmare of a physical infestation that never stops. Now, you should know about the administrative aftermath of that specific interview. Very shortly after that exchange, Dr. Jameson and several key members of his research team were abruptly transferred off of SCP-027 to a completely different project. The reasons for that sudden institutional restructuring remain classified above your clearance, but it really underscores just how volatile managing this specific containment detail can be. Section 5. Final Security Directives. The most dangerous question we face today is this: how exactly does SCP-027 select its next target when a host dies? And the terrifying truth is, the mechanism of transfer remains completely unknown. We don't know if it's based on proximity, biological markers, or just pure random chance. And that represents a massive operational vulnerability for us. 200. I want you to burn this number into your memory right now, because this is your strict mandate. Until SCP-027 is better understood, absolutely no personnel of Level 4 clearance or higher may approach within 200 meters of Subject 027-02. We simply cannot risk our high-value intelligence, our command staff, or literally anyone in this room becoming the next host when a transfer event inevitably happens. That exclusion zone is absolute and non-negotiable. Preliminary evidence tells us this anomaly has been around for centuries, just transferring from host to host in the shadows. And it will likely transfer again. It's persistent, it's ancient, and it is simply waiting for Subject 027-02's body to finally give out under the strain of the swarm. Which leaves us with one final vital question to close this briefing. If Subject 027-02's heart stops beating today, are you absolutely certain you are far enough away? Check your proximity, maintain your distance, and trust the containment protocols. Dismissed.
Alright, listen up folks. Welcome to today's Mandatory Intelligence Explanator. I am your commanding officer for this session, and we're operating under strictly classified, high-level security clearance today. You're in this room because the threat matrix we're currently managing is escalating, and your operational awareness isn't just a box to check anymore, it's quite literally a matter of life or death. So we're going to dive straight into the dossier on the anomaly designated SCP-019. What we're dealing with here completely defies standard biological and physical laws,
and understanding the parameters of this threat is pretty much the only thing standing between containment and a site-wide catastrophic breach. We've got 5 key areas to cover: containment protocols, a physical overview, entity analysis, manifestation catalysts, and finally, entity evolution. Strict adherence to this intelligence is absolutely non-negotiable, so let's get right into it.
Section 1. Containment Protocols and Parameters. The primary objective of this briefing, and honestly of your entire assignment here, is maintaining absolute, unwavering control over this anomaly.
Now, SCP-0119 is designated as a Keter-class anomaly. For anyone newly transferred to this wing, Keter doesn't just mean dangerous, okay? It means the anomaly is exceedingly difficult to contain consistently or reliably. It's an active, complex, and ongoing threat to everyone in this facility and the outside world. There's zero margin for error when you're dealing with Keter objects. Seriously, if you blink, if you hesitate for even a second, containment fails.
So, here are your primary containment directives. SCP-019 has to be kept resting on a wide grate inside a precise 3x3 by 4 meter reinforced concrete room. Second, the ambient temperature has to be kept at exactly 0 degrees Celsius at all times when the incinerator isn't running. Third, the object must remain strictly vertical, and we'll get into exactly why that's so crucial in just a minute. Finally, a high-grade incinerator needs to be installed, kept on standby, and monitored from a separate chamber behind plate glass. Now, if a localized outbreak happens, ordinary firearms are authorized. They work fine for taking down single targets. But if you're looking at a swarm-level breach, standard firearms are completely useless. At that point, flamethrowers in the room's incinerator are your mandatory countermeasures. Moving on to Section 2, the physical overview of SCP-0119. Let's pivot away from how we cage this thing and look at the actual anomalous object itself.
So, what are we actually looking at? Well, metric-wise, SCP-019 appears to be a massive ceramic vase. It stands 2.4 meters high with a mouth diameter of 1.8 meters. Based on the style and the decoration, it looks like it was created in classical Greece. But here's the kicker. Conclusive dating is absolutely impossible. Why? Because the surface material is entirely unbreakable by any known scientific or anomalous means. And let me be unequivocally clear about your standing orders here. If our research teams ever discover a method to bypass its indestructible surface, the directive is immediate destruction of SCP-019 with extreme prejudice. We don't want to study this object any further, we just want to end it.
Section 3. SCP-0192 Entity Analysis. We're shifting focus now from the indestructible vase to the secondary physical threat, the hostile entities that periodically crawl out of it. We've got a severe tactical dichotomy going on here. On the one hand, you have the primary source, SCP-0119, indestructible, totally static, just an inanimate ceramic object. But on the other hand, you have the output, which we designate SCP-0119-2. These are biological, delicate, surprisingly flammable, and highly hostile swarms. These entities are small, vaguely humanoid, usually showing some weird animalistic features, and they will immediately attack personnel using teeth and claws. Now, individually, they're fragile, but they are reasonably strong, and their threat level multiplies exponentially when they swarm in large numbers. To really understand the biology here, consider this chilling observation from Dr. Vox's dissection logs. He noted, "It appears that SCP-019-2 specimens were not intended to live for meaningful amounts of time outside of SCP-019. Think about that. Captured specimens kept in reinforced pens, even when we give them live food like chickens, they don't even last 48 hours. They make these garbled noises that sound faintly like ancient Hellenic, but they possess absolutely no intelligence higher than a wild animal. The dissections revealed a total nightmare of biology. Highly unstable musculoskeletal structures, messed up respiratory systems, and virtually no digestive tract. They are literally biological weaponry. They are designed for one purpose, to spawn, inflict brief, violent attacks, and then die rapidly." Section 4. Catalysts for Entity Manifestation. Now that you know what we're fighting, let's accelerate the pace a bit and talk about environmental triggers. You need to know exactly what causes these things to spawn. 1 entity per hour. Burn that metric into your brain. That is our absolute baseline manifestation rate. But you need to understand, we only get that baseline when the object is kept perfectly at rest, strictly vertical, and locked in an environment of precisely 0 degrees Celsius. That's our best case scenario. The moment we deviate from that baseline,
containment is compromised. Here are the confirmed catalysts that violently accelerate the manifestation rate. Any movement of SCP-019, any perceived threat to the object, extreme temperature highs or lows, and dropping any foreign objects or organisms inside the vase triggers a catastrophic flood reaction. Furthermore, and this is wild, tipping or tilting the object creates a complete optical and physical nightmare. If you look in from above, all you see is a dark hole, but tipping it, that causes a massive swarm outbreak, exactly as if the object was entirely filled with SCP-019-2 specimens. The internal cavity completely defies outside physical measurements.
Beyond those confirmed triggers, you also need to be aware of the suspected catalysts that we're actively investigating. The manifestation rates seem to spike based on the sheer proximity of human life, shifts in current weather patterns, and, honestly, the most disturbing one, the presence of specific personnel. Certain individuals seem to inexplicably agitate the object, causing faster emergence rates just by standing near containment. So if you notice an uptick in spawns during your shift, report it immediately. You might literally be the trigger. Alright, Section 5, Entity Evolution and Escalating Threat. I need everyone to pay very close attention to this final section because it highlights the severe gravity of our recent intelligence updates. The biology of SCP-019-2 is not static, it is learning.
Just take a look at this evolutionary timeline. Initially, as we discussed, the entities had frail biology, dying in less than 2 days. But then, our monitoring teams actually missed some containment damage because the specimens had developed partial transparency, active camouflage that had never been documented before. Following that, they started showing increased resistance to incineration. And now, the latest logs from Dr. Light confirm that most specimens are virtually immune to the effects of our thermal incinerators. They are adapting to our lethal countermeasures at a truly terrifying speed.
Because they've evolved to resist fire, our operational tactics have to pivot immediately. A directive update is already in progress. The complete replacement of our thermal incinerators with high-grade acid baths is currently under tactical review. We are quite literally being forced into an arms race with an indestructible piece of pottery. Which brings us to the most grave question of today's intelligence explainer, and something every security commander in this room has to think about. This evolution of SCP-019-2 points to a reactionary defense mechanism. So, is SCP-019 demonstrating hostile sentience? Is this unbreakable vase actively analyzing our defenses and engineering better killers to break containment? And if so, how long can our static containment protocols really hold out against an enemy factory that is indestructible, unmeasurable, and constantly adapting? Dismissed. Return to your post. Welcome everyone. Let's get straight to it. You're here for the classified internal threat assessment explainer on SCP-008. I'll be running your briefing today. Look, we're dealing with a catastrophically dangerous biological hazard here. So we're going to break down the sheer scale of this threat using the unvarnished facts pulled straight from the Foundation archives. Pay attention. But before we go any further, I need you to verify your credentials. What we're discussing today is strictly subject to Level 4 classification. That comes directly from the Overseer Council. We need absolute clinical objectivity here. So if you don't actually hold Level 4 clearance, you are violating protocol right now and you need to terminate this explainer immediately. Alright, moving on. Here's our itinerary for today. We've got 6 critical areas to hit: clearance verification, extreme containment procedures, the prion threat profile, infection symptom timeline, physiological and behavioral mutations, and finally, neutralization and contingencies. Starting with Section 1, Clearance Verification. Alright, clearance verified. Now, be advised right out of the gate, SCP-008 currently operates under an object class of Euclid. Now you all know what Euclid means. It's inherently unpredictable, it's not fully understood, and it requires rock-solid, constant containment to stop a breach. Because believe me, a breach of 008 is a nightmare scenario we go to terrifying lengths to avoid. Which brings us right to Section 2, Extreme Containment Procedures. So, SCP-008 samples are classified as Class 5 extreme biological hazards, and because of that, they're subject to 3 absolute terminal directives. If there's a facility breach, or say some political or military interference tries to dismantle the site, or even if we just lose power or comms for 8 hours, these steps trigger automatically. And listen to this,
there is a strict zero evacuation policy. None. The facility is simply subjected to total incineration and intense radiation. The Foundation will literally sacrifice specialized G2 staff to make sure this anomaly never sees the light of day. That's how serious this is.
And even when things are perfectly normal, with no breach at all, the protocols are still absolutely staggering. If an operative is just routinely leaving a secure G2 facility, they have to undergo a strict, mandatory quarantine period of precisely 4 months. Yeah, 4 months of complete isolation just for walking out the front door. It really kind of paints a picture of the paranoia surrounding this agent, doesn't it? Let's dive into the biology. Section 3, the prion threat profile. Fundamentally, SCP-008 is a complex prion. Now, a normal prion is just a protein that makes other proteins in your brain fold abnormally. But 008, it is vastly more intricate than anything you'll find in conventional medicine. And let me be clear, our primary research objective here is absolutely not weaponization. No way. The research is strictly aimed at the total prevention of its future synthesis. We are literally only studying this thing to make sure nobody else can ever build it. The threat profile on this anomaly is defined by some pretty terrifying absolutes. We're talking 100% infectiousness and 100% lethality upon exposure. If you're exposed, you're infected. If you're infected, you die. It transmits through exposed mucous membranes and all bodily fluids. Honestly, the only saving grace, the literal only reason humanity hasn't been wiped out by this yet, is that it's neither airborne nor waterborne. So what happens when someone gets it? Section 4, Infection Symptom Timeline. The speed of 008 is just brutal. Within just 3 hours of exposure, symptoms aggressively manifest. It kicks off with flu-like symptoms and a really high fever, but then it rapidly spirals into extreme severe dementia. About 20 hours after those first symptoms hit, and roughly 12 hours after the dementia really sets in, the subject drops into a coma. Operationally speaking, we consider that coma state at the 20-hour mark the definitive onset of clinical death. But as we're about to see, with 008, death is really just the beginning. Section 5, Physiological and Behavioral Mutations. Visually speaking, the subject goes through some horrific changes. They develop severe, sporadic cellular necrosis that heavily mimics gangrene. Basically, they look like a walking, rotting corpse. But don't let that fool you. It's deeply deceptive. The tissue that actually survives assumes its original function and becomes incredibly resilient. On top of that, their metabolism plummets drastically. It drops so low that we've documented infected subjects surviving for over 10 years without a single drop of nutrition. And this right here illustrates the absolute tactical nightmare we're up against. When you compare standard human frailties to an infected subject, the biological advantages are terrifying. The prion causes a massive spike in red blood cell oxygen storage. Their blood viscosity thickens up so much that they barely even bleed from gunshots, punctures, or slash wounds. You literally cannot bleed them out. And worse, their nervous and muscular systems become totally immune to total organ failure for several hours. You could destroy their internal organs and they will literally just ignore it and keep coming. Behaviorally, things are just as bad. Their conditioned behaviors and cognitive abilities are profoundly destroyed or severely retarded, but they retain this chilling, aggressive baseline. They adapt to their damaged nervous system just enough to keep basic physical functions running. They can stand, balance on 2 legs, walk, bite, grab, and crawl. And the most dangerous part? They will energetically track sights, sounds, and smells associated with living humans, specifically trying to ingest them upon physical contact. Moving to our final area, Section 6, Neutralization and Contingencies. Because of that extreme resilience, the thick blood, and the fact that they just don't need their internal organs, your standard takedown methods are completely useless here. So the formal neutralization directive is singular and explicit. The only viable method to put down a fully infected subject is to inflict severe, significant cranial trauma. You have to destroy the brain to stop the motor functions. Anything less, and you're just wasting ammunition. Now you might be wondering, is there any hope at all if a critical operative gets exposed? While Contingency Addendum 0081 confirms that another anomaly, SCP-500, has proven capable of completely curing the 008 infection, even in its most advanced stages. But listen to me carefully. SCP-500 is a vastly limited resource. Yes, it's a perfect cure, but it is strictly a contingency. It is definitely not an excuse for lax containment. So we have to ask the big question. Where exactly did this thing come from? Well, the official file notes strong evidence suggesting SCP-008 did not form naturally on Earth. And the logic there is actually pretty straightforward. Given the sheer biological complexity of this prion, if variants like this had naturally evolved here, they would have inevitably displaced Earth's entire ecosystem a long time ago. The evidence overwhelmingly points to a highly classified non-terrestrial origin.
Naturally, the history of our containment efforts is packed with geopolitical complications. Back in 1959, when we first discovered this horrific threat, we actually had to force a brief collaborative effort with the USSR. The goal was to locate G2 sites and wipe out any existing stockpiles of 008. But as you can probably guess, that unprecedented alliance didn't last long, and ever since that collaboration ended, the status of SCP-008 in Russian custody has remained completely unverified.
Which brings us to the end of today's explainer and leaves us staring down a terrifying, unanswered threat assessment for global security. Because if the Foundation hasn't been able to verify the containment of those Russian assets since 1959, we are dealing with an active apocalyptic blind spot. We know it's 100% lethal, we know about the horrifying physiological mutations, and we know the extreme measures it takes to stop it. So as you head back to your secure post today, I want you to ask yourselves one chilling question. Where exactly is that Russian stockpile today? Stay vigilant out there, everyone. Trust the containment protocols. Dismissed.
All right, let's get started. Welcome, high-level security personnel. You're here today for a strictly classified, mandatory explainer on the threat profile and containment parameters of SCP-012. I need you to sit down, focus, and really pay attention here, because what we're about to cover, it's not theoretical. This is literally a matter of site security and, frankly, your own personal survival. Okay, let's dive right into this briefing. We'll be moving through this explainer sequentially. First, object identification. Second, containment protocols. Third, origin and discovery. Fourth, its anomalous nature. And finally, number 5, testing outcomes. Section 1, object identification. SCP-012 is classified as Euclid. Now let me be unequivocally clear with all of you right now. The Euclid designation means this anomaly is either insufficiently understood or it's inherently unpredictable. It requires absolutely reliable, constant containment to prevent breaches. Do not let the physical simplicity of this object fool you. Euclid means uncompromising adherence to established security measures from every single one of you. There's zero room for complacency here. Moving right along to Section 2, containment protocols. The mandatory physical containment steps are as follows. Number 1, SCP-012 must be kept in a completely darkened room at all times. 2, it is to be observed strictly via infrared light frequencies. 3, it has to be encased in an iron-shielded box. And 4, that box must be suspended exactly 2.5 meters, about 8 feet, from all floors, walls, and any openings. So why are we doing this? Well, any exposure to standard light frequencies triggers the object's anomalous effect. If you, or frankly anyone on your team, views this object outside of those infrared parameters, protocol dictates the immediate removal of that personnel for mental health screening and a full physical evaluation. Flawless execution of these 4 steps? It's not negotiable. Section 3, origin and discovery. So where did this thing come from? The item was discovered by archaeologist K.M. Sandoval. It was pulled from an excavated tomb in northern Italy, one that had just been destroyed by a severe storm. So picture an uncontained environment, completely chaotic and totally unsecured. The Foundation intercepted the findings, which brings us to the immediate and, quite frankly, catastrophic fallout of that unsecured initial contact. 2. I want you to really internalize what that number represents. When Site-19's Special Salvage Team arrived to secure the asset, the first personnel to locate the sheet suffered catastrophic psychological failure. 2 members of our own team immediately descended into fatal insanity the second they located the object. They didn't just lose their minds. The cognitohazardous compulsion drove them to attempt something absolutely horrifying, which we'll detail in a minute. 2 highly trained operatives gone, just like that, due to field exposure. Which brings us to Section 4, anomalous nature. This right here brilliantly illustrates the deceptive nature of the anomaly. The object is, seemingly, just an incomplete, handwritten musical score. The title, written on the piece, is On Mount Golgotha. It appears to be just one part of a larger set of sheet music.
So, on the surface, it looks like a simple historical artifact, but the physical composition, that's where the extreme hazard actually lies. You see, the initial assumption by the recovery team was that the dark red and black fluid used to write the musical notes was, some form of natural berry or organic dye ink. But the actual composition, confirmed by our lab analysis, it's human blood. And it's not just from one source. It is human blood extracted from multiple subjects. This object is a gruesome composite of biological material literally weaponized into a visual trigger. Finally, Section 5. Testing outcomes. Following the initial investigations, we allowed multiple subjects access to the score in a highly controlled environment. The results? They're unified and they're devastating. First up, severe self-mutilation. Every single subject experienced an overwhelming compulsion to use their own blood to finish the composition. This was accompanied by immediate symptoms of profound psychosis. And the ultimate result in literally every case was massive internal trauma and exsanguination. They essentially bleed themselves to death trying to write the next notes. Understand, this isn't a suggestion. It's a forced biological override of the subject's basic survival instincts.
Now, for those subjects who somehow managed to actually finish a small section of the piece before expiring, the outcome was equally grim. They immediately committed suicide, but right before doing so, they declared these exact final words: impossible to complete. The cognitohazard forces them to write, completely drains their life force, and then just breaks their psyche entirely when they realize the sheer futility of the task. So you might be wondering, as a piece of sheet music, what does it actually sound like? Well, the data is crystal clear. Audio performances of On Mount Golgotha result in a highly disagreeable cacophony. There is absolutely no harmony. There's no instrumental correlation between the parts. It's just a chaotic, uncoordinated noise. It isn't music at all. It is pure madness transcribed onto paper in the blood of its victims. So the crucial question we have to ask today is this: will your team adhere to protocol? And believe me, that is not a rhetorical question. The survival of your squad and the security of this entire site depend entirely on your flawless execution of the procedures we've mapped out in this explainer. Darkness, infrared viewing, suspension, iron shielding. Anything less invites a containment breach, and you've just seen the empirical data on what happens next. Internalize this briefing. You're dismissed to your post. All right, let's settle in. Welcome, personnel. I'm your briefing officer for today, and we've got a highly sensitive, strictly classified explainer to get through as Foundation Security. You're stepping into a Level 4 threat assessment covering a notoriously volatile Euclid-class anomaly. So focus up. The intel in this briefing isn't just academic, it's absolutely essential for your ongoing survival on site. Okay, let's dive into this. Now, the fact that you're sitting here means Site Command has verified your security clearance. And believe me, a highly secure environment is totally necessary today. We're going to be discussing the severe, highly reactive anomalous properties of a subject that has, frankly, cost our organization heavily in the past. Let's take a quick look at the agenda for today's operational briefing. We're covering 1. Object identification. 2. Structural composition. 3. Defensive threat vectors. 4. Incident report. And finally, 5. Containment mandates. Understanding this structure is absolutely vital for your continued survival at this facility, so let's keep moving. Moving right into Section 1, Object Identification and the sheer scale of the anomaly. Let's look at the physical impossibility of what exactly it is we're trying to contain here. We're dealing with SCP-015. So, what is it? Well, it's a Euclid-class anomalous mass of pipes, vents, boilers, basically a massive plumbing apparatus that completely fills a warehouse in its designated containment sector. But here's what makes this entity such a persistent, active threat. It actually grows when it's left unobserved. Seriously, if we aren't actively watching it, it attempts to physically expand and connect itself to nearby structures by linking right into local sewer systems and underground plumbing. It is essentially a self-replicating, spreading infection of industrial hardware. And when I say it grows, I really want you to grasp the massive scale we're dealing with. 190. That is the current estimate in kilometers of the pipes making up this entity. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 120 miles of twisting, overlapping plumbing packed into a single location. And these pipes range dramatically in size too. You've got some as narrow as 2.5 centimeters, while others are massive conduits over a meter in diameter. Some look brand new, while others are heavily rusted and actively leaking. But listen, the scale is just the beginning.
That brings us to Section 2, Structural Composition. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the anomalous materials involved, because the sheer volume of this anomaly is honestly dwarfed by the horrifying reality of its makeup.
Look, when you think of plumbing, you naturally think of traditional materials, right? Lead, PVC plastic, copper. Well, none of those have ever been found within SCP-015. Not a single trace. Instead, the pipes comprising this bizarre structure are made of bone, wood, steel, pressed ash, glass, and granite. And, most disturbingly, human flesh. Yes, you heard that right. You are not looking at a standard municipal water system. You're looking at an incomprehensible, macabre assembly of organic and inorganic matter somehow fused together.
Let's move on to Section 3, Defensive Threat Vectors, specifically its violent reactions. I need your absolute, undivided attention here, folks, because we are going to cover the lethal consequences of triggering this entity's defense mechanisms.
Because SCP-015 isn't just weird to look at, it is highly reactive and incredibly hostile. Let's walk through the steps of a typical engagement. Step 1. Triggering the anomaly. This happens if any personnel acts violently or even simply carries hand or power tools into the area, or tries to damage or repair the structure in any way. Do that and you immediately initiate Step 2, Proximity Pipe Burst. Any pipes near the offending subject will violently rupture. This directly leads to Step 3, Hostile Material Spray, where the burst pipes spray their contents directly onto the subject for several seconds. And finally, Step 4, Continuation. The initial flow will suddenly stop, only for different pipes to immediately burst all around the subject. This violent cycle will continue relentlessly until the subject is dead or until they somehow manage to completely retreat from the area. So, you might be wondering, what exactly is spraying out of these pipes? Well, ejected contents include oil and mercury, but it gets far, far worse. Survivors have reported being sprayed with live rats, an unidentified species of insect, ground glass, seawater, entrails, and even molten iron. I mean, no way, right? But it uses whatever horrific anomalous resources it possesses internally to violently reject any perceived interference. Alright, Section 4, Incident Report. Operational losses. We need to take a hard look at the historical cost of containing this anomaly, because the Foundation has paid a very heavy price in blood to learn these rules. Let's review the metrics on the board. Before we actually managed to cut SCP-0115 back to its current footprint, it successfully attached itself to 11 other structures in the surrounding area. And to achieve our current state of containment, 11 Foundation personnel were killed in action. Furthermore, 20 personnel are currently classified as missing. So the crucial point is that these numbers aren't just statistics on a board. They represent past operational failures that we absolutely must learn from, because complacency around SCP-0115 literally equals death. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Containment Mandates. Absolute Directives. These are the rigid, unbending rules that you will enforce to prevent any further casualties. The special containment procedures are absolute and completely non-negotiable. First, you must maintain a 2-meter or 6-foot gap around the entire structure at all times. Second, absolutely no physical contact with the containment structure by any outside structures of any kind. Third, exploration is only permissible in teams of exactly 3, equipped with full safety lines and GPS tracking. Fourth, if the entity grows a new protrusion, your team must cap, seal, and log that new site immediately. And finally, the absolute golden rule: no aggressive actions, no tools of any kind, hand or power, and no repairs or maintenance are to be made anywhere inside SCP-015. I cannot stress this enough, absolute compliance with these directives is the only way you will survive an encounter. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a note direct from the official incident logs. Quote, "Reports have been made of banging and screaming coming from within SCP-015. I really want you to remember those 20 missing personnel we discussed just a minute ago. They aren't just gone, they are inside. Let the grim reality of that sink in for a moment." And that brings us to the end of our explainer briefing. So, who or what is still screaming within the 190 kilometers of SCP-015? Well, we don't know for certain,
But it's exactly why your mission here as security personnel is so absolutely critical. Study these slides, memorize the mandates, and above all, stay vigilant out there. Dismissed.
Initiating secure connection. You're accessing a classified tactical briefing regarding anomaly SCP-895. Your Level 3 clearance has been verified. Acknowledge and let's proceed. Consider this your final warning. You are now reviewing heavily restricted data. Any unauthorized dissemination or viewing of the materials in this briefing will result in your immediate termination. We are proceeding. This briefing covers 5 critical sections: Executive Threat Briefing, Containment Architecture and Hazard Matrix, Recovery Operation Initiation, Critical Failure of Team 1, and finally, Updated Mandates and Restrictions.
Section 1. Executive Threat Briefing.
SCP-895 is classified as a Euclid-level anomaly. If you were standing right in front of it, physically, it just looks like a heavily ornate oak coffin. We originally recovered this asset from a commercial mortuary after staff reported highly disturbing, unexplained footage appearing on their local security feeds. Nobody could account for where it came from or who brought it in.
Section 2. Containment Architecture and Hazard Matrix.
Our subterranean containment architecture for this object demands absolute isolation. SCP-895 must remain permanently sealed within an underground containment cell located exactly 100 meters below surface level at all times. There are 0 exceptions to this structural requirement. This anomaly operates on a deeply paradoxical mechanism. Direct physical observation, meaning you are standing in the very same room with the object, is perfectly harmless. It appears empty. The hazard triggers exclusively when you view SCP-895 through a digital feed, like a camera, a monitor, or a screen. The object projects vivid, deeply traumatic hallucinations directly into the digital signal. Let's break down the threat radius mathematics. We've mapped a 50-meter disruption zone around the object where surveillance gear will severely malfunction, feeding you variable hallucinations. But if you push into the 5-meter radius, you've entered the lethal zone. Viewing digital feeds captured within this 5-meter boundary causes instantaneous, severe psychological trauma. It induces mass hysteria and total cognitive collapse in the viewer. Section 3. Recovery Operation Initiation. Let's review Event Log 895-01. These were the parameters of the initial recovery operation. Tactical Team 1 was deployed on-site to the commercial mortuary to locate and secure the target asset. Remote Command, stationed securely off-site, was assigned to guide them in using live digital camera feeds from the team's tactical gear. The mission timeline outlines exactly how quickly things unraveled. At 0341 local time, Team 1 makes entry. By 0343, a standard lobby video check is initiated. At 0344, Command begins reporting visual disruptions on their end. 0347, the target is visually acquired. And at 0349, the object is physically opened by the Strait team. The very first signs of the anomaly manifesting hit at 0344. Remote Command, observing strictly via their digital screens, began receiving totally compromised feed data. This is where we see the initial disconnect established between Team 1's safe physical reality on the ground and Command's contaminated digital reality. The audio transcript perfectly illustrates this disconnect. Command radios in, stating, "We are seeing blood on the walls. Please confirm." To which the Team 1 lead responds, "Negative, Command. It's clean in here. Nothing out of the ordinary." Command was already being actively exposed to the digital hazards, completely unaware that the physical site was perfectly pristine. The threat escalates sharply at 0348 as Team 1 physically enters the storage area. As the tactical team's proximity to the object decreased, the intensity of the digital distortion fed back to Command skyrocketed. The cognitive hazard affecting the remote observers was compounding by the second. You can hear the cognitive deterioration at Command becoming rapid. Command frantically reports over the radio, "Christ, it's moving. Team 1, confirm. Object appears to be alive and moving." Team 1 calmly replies, "Negative. We see no movement. Object is normal." Team 1 then proceeds to physically open the coffin on site, confirming for the record that it is completely empty.
Section 4. Critical Failure, Team 1. At 0351, Team 1 crossed the threshold into the 5-meter lethal zone with their helmet cameras still active. The Team 1 lead asks, "Command, do you copy?" What follows on the raw audio log is the sound of command staff erupting into incoherent screaming, panicked shouting, and violent retching. The digital hallucinations had instantly caused massive, catastrophic psychological trauma to the remote viewers. Hearing their handlers break down, the Team 1 lead aborts the operation, shouting, "Shit! We're bugging out! Close that thing!"
Section 5. Updated mandates and restrictions. The official incident aftermath report confirmed the permanent loss of 3 remote command personnel. I want to make this explicitly clear. These casualties were sustained strictly due to lethal observation via a digital feed. Being physically miles away provided absolutely zero protection from the transmitted cognitive hazard. Because of this critical failure, heavily revised containment protocols are now in effect. There is a strict, non-negotiable prohibition on all cameras, microphones, and surveillance equipment anywhere within the anomaly's radius. Digitizing the containment space in any way is strictly forbidden.
Here are your expanded operational mandates. The red zone has been officially extended to 10 meters. Zero digital technology is permitted within this radius. Furthermore, mandatory psychological screening is now required for all on-site personnel, and physical security shifts are strictly restricted to a maximum of 4 hours. Displaying any unusual behavior will result in your immediate termination. Your personal safety dictates absolute adherence to these analog protocols. The digital interface simply cannot be trusted anymore. Secure connection terminated. One final thought before you log off. You've just watched this entire tactical briefing through a digital monitor. Based on the severe cognitive hazards we just detailed, are you absolutely certain your current feed is uncompromised? All right, let's get started. Welcome, high-level personnel, to today's classified briefing. You're sitting in this room because you've been granted the clearance to review the operational parameters of a highly volatile Euclid-class threat. We're looking at SCP-009 today. Look, the stakes of this briefing literally cannot be overstated. A failure to understand the material we're going over doesn't just mean a localized breach. We're talking about a potential global extinction-level event. So I need your absolute utmost focus. So here's our itinerary. We're going to hit 5 key areas: containment protocols, anomalous properties, biological conversion, the retrieval timeline, and finally, the alternate universe hypothesis. Let's just dive right in. Section 1. Containment protocols. Absolute isolation procedures. The sheer unbelievable redundancy required to keep this substance stable is absolutely crucial to understand. SCP-009 has to be housed in a sealed, heat-resistant alloy tank no smaller than 2 by 2 by 2 meters and kept strictly below 0 degrees Celsius at all times. To pull that off, we use 3 redundant cooling units that are monitored 24/7. Now, if that temperature climbs even slightly above -5 degrees, we initiate an immediate lockdown and flood the chamber with coolant to slam it back down to -30. Testing? It requires a total vacuum and full environmental gear, no exceptions. And post-testing involves a mandatory 12-hour dehydration and quarantining for everyone and everything involved. Trust me, even a minor thermal breach is completely catastrophic. Which brings us to the most important number of the day, 30 meters. You maintain a hard 30-meter perimeter. Absolutely no water-based solutions are allowed within 30 meters of that containment area. Why? Because a single drop of mundane moisture wandering into that zone could kick off a runaway chain reaction that our systems literally cannot suppress. Moving to Section 2, anomalous properties, subversion of enthalpy. So this anomaly violently contrasts with mundane physics. On the surface, it kind of looks like distilled water, but with this distinct bright red hue, which is actually our best and fastest way to spot contamination. But here's the kicker. Its states of matter are completely inverted. Normal H2O, as you know, freezes below 0 degrees and boils at 100. SCP-009, it's a solid above 0 degrees Celsius. It liquefies between -100 and 0, and it only vaporizes below -100 degrees. It's a total, literal subversion of standard enthalpy. It just doesn't play by the rules. And this brilliantly illustrates our true threat vector. The main hazard of SCP-009 isn't just that its temperature is inverted. No, It's its ability to assimilate normal aqueous solutions. Whether we're talking about ice, steam, a cup of tea, fruit juice, seawater, or human blood, SCP-009 transfers its anomalous properties to literally any moisture it touches. It acts exactly like a highly contagious viral contaminant, just converting regular matter into more of itself. Let's turn to Section 3, Biological Conversion. D-Class Personnel Testing Stages. The clinical progression of biological conversion is, frankly, horrific to witness. Step 1. Initial exposure. The substance assimilates surface moisture on the skin. Usually, the subject just feels a slight warming sensation, nothing major. Then, Step 2. Surface conversion. The natural heat of the human body raises the anomaly's temperature above 0 degrees. Frost starts forming, and then red crystals violently erupt right out of the epidermis. Finally, Step 3. Deep tissue conversion. That exponential temperature increase causes a runaway internal crystallization process. And here's the truly grim part. Because those internal ice crystals essentially plug the wounds, actual blood loss is practically zero, meaning the victim remains fully, painfully conscious for hours as they literally freeze solid from the inside out.
Alright, Section 4. Retrieval Timeline. Origin and Incident Logs. On November 5th, SCP-009 was retrieved in Alaska after a native tribe stumbled upon the mangled, red ice-encased remains of shipwrecked seal hunters. But the true horror of this situation really hit on December 6th. That's when Foundation surveys confirmed the initial site was a stretch of barren rock merely meters away from the seashore. Think about that for a second. If that original spill had reached Alaskan waters, oceanic contamination would have undeniably triggered a global extinction-level event. So unsurprisingly, by January 9th, O5 Command was actively evaluating requests for a Keter upgrade and exploring potential cold fusion applications.
Which leads us directly to this memo from O5 Command, and I quote, "We've decided to keep this thing Euclid for now. As for the cold fusion research, we're putting a pin in that. We don't have it in the budget for another snafu." Look, O5 Command's pragmatic decree really highlights the bureaucratic reality of Foundation leadership. They firmly rejected the Keter reclassification, basically banking on our ability to maintain strict containment protocols, and they completely shut down those risky cold fusion experiments after, well, previous heavily redacted catastrophic failures. Moving on to Section 5, Alternate Universe Hypothesis, Cross-Testing Report 9507-F23. Now the implications shift from a nasty chemical hazard to a full-blown extra-dimensional threat when you review our cross-tests with SCP-507. In a parallel reality, introducing a mere 10 milliliters of SCP-009 produced a moderate red snow that fell for 27 solid minutes. The environmental reaction? Immediate. Local grass froze instantly via a runaway reaction. But far more alarmingly, the non-grass flora turned bright red, greatly expanded, and actually mutated to grow cyan tentacles, something resembling the Drosera capensis species. These plants didn't just survive the red ice, they integrated SCP-009 directly into their cellular structure, weaponizing it to produce a mucilage made entirely of SCP-009 beads. This brings us to the xenospatial physics hypothesis. Dr. Blind theorizes that SCP-009, along with that mutated flora capable of surviving and integrating it, actually originate from an alternate universe with completely divergent physical laws. This strongly suggests that the substance we have in that tank is not merely some localized anomaly. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a native element of a completely foreign reality that is violently imposing its own physics onto ours. So, we are left with one incredibly critical question. Is SCP-009 just a contained anomalous material, or is it actually the vanguard of an extra-dimensional ecosystem just waiting for the chance to consume our oceans? I want you to seriously reflect on that as you review your containment schedules. You aren't just guarding a tank of red ice down there, you are literally holding back an invasive alien ecosystem. Study your briefings, maintain absolute containment, and whatever you do not let your guard down. Dismissed. By order of the Overseer Council, this is a Level 4 classified briefing regarding item number SCP-2316, designated Field Trip. This terminal readout contains critical containment data for a Keter-class anomalous phenomenon. The stakes of this readout are absolute. Unauthorized access is strictly forbidden and is punishable by immediate termination of employment and complete cognitive restructuring.
Be advised, the following file contains structural parameters and text logging that function as active carriers for anomalous, cognitohazardous influences. It is a strict operational mandate that the user accessing this briefing possesses certified cognitive resistance value, or CRV, of no less than 14.5. The system will now conduct an automated CRV verification check. Should you fail this automated verification, please remain entirely calm and do not move. A member of your site's medical staff will be deployed to your location shortly for immediate amnestic intervention.
To complete the automated verification process, you are required to internalize the following psychological warning mantra. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Adjusted tonal variance processor run. Processing complete. User CRV is within acceptable limits. Proceeding to operational briefing. Section 1. Operational parameters and containment. Under no circumstances are Foundation personnel to physically approach the anomaly. Strict protocols govern all physical proximity to the site.
The lake in which SCP-2316 is located has been aggressively quarantined and fenced off. The quarantine protocol enforces a strict 50-meter perimeter. Routine patrol vectors around the zone must be staffed exclusively by individuals who have zero prior knowledge of the anomaly's characteristics and who have not been previously exposed to its cognitive hazardous effects. Direct observation is restricted entirely to remote dummy probes, utilizing dedicated video and audio recording equipment to isolate cognitive transfer.
Any attempt to bypass the enforced quarantine will result in mandatory apprehension and transfer to Site 33 for full cognitive influence screening. Individuals who come within 50 meters of the lake containing SCP-2316 are to be considered lost. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Section 2. The Hazard Profile. We will now proceed with an objective overview of the anomaly's physical manifestation and theorized composition, based on available operational data. SCP-2316 is a Keter-class anomalous phenomenon, currently located within lake designated redacted. Classification matrices designate the physical manifestation as a group of human corpses floating in a localized cluster at the surface of the water. The identities of these corpses are classified and currently unknown. It must be noted that remote DNA testing on the instances has proven entirely inconclusive. The biological material present does not match any known baseline records. While visual data suggests a collection of individual instances, current Foundation theory indicates SCP-2316 may function collectively as a single entity, or hive mind. Individual instances do not act independently, but function synchronously as a single unit. Current telemetry estimates the number of visible instances at 45. However, upper bound projections suggest the total count may exceed 200 instances submerged beneath the surface. System check protocol required. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. The individual instances are unrecognizable. Your cognitive baseline must remain anchored at all times during this briefing. Section 3. Cognitohazard Progression Vectors. SCP-2316 hosts a highly aggressive psychological threat mechanic. This sequence will now outline how the anomaly systematically degrades the cognitive resistance of an exposed subject. The cognitohazard operates in a self-sustaining four-step loop. Step 1 is exposure, achieved either through direct visual contact or mere awareness of the anomaly's specific nature. Step 2 involves severe memory alteration. The target falsely perceives the unrecognizable corpses as familiar human beings, overwhelmingly identified as childhood friends. Step 3 enforces a compulsion, driving the target to attempt physical contact by entering the lake. Step 4 is reinforcement. Any physical interaction exponentially strengthens the cognitohazard's pull. Attempting to come into contact with the water or the entities will cause additional instances of SCP-2316 to manifest on the surface. These additional instances reinforce the compulsion effect on the victim. System status indicates absolute casualty rates. To date, there have been 0 recoveries of affected subjects. Entry into the water is universally fatal. Section 4. Hostile Override Assessment. Warning. The terminal is now registering active hostile data insertions originating from Addendum 2316.1. Do not adjust your viewing apparatus. This corrupted threat data must be reviewed impartially to understand the anomaly's attack vectors. Processing corrupted interview log between Dr. Harrison and an exposed agent. In the log, the agent demonstrates advanced cognitive failure. When asked what they saw upon entering the water, the infected subject claimed to see familiar faces. The subject states,
Not moving their mouths, but I could hear them, asking for help. They told me who they were.
this is a documented auditory hallucination synthesized by the hazard field. The agent's condition rapidly accelerates into stage 4 hostile override. Subject displays frantic behavior, stating,
I know all their names, Harrison. I heard them speaking to me, every single one.
the anomaly successfully inserts a false narrative regarding a high school class. The correct operational response, as executed by Dr. Harrison via terminal directive, is the immediate administration of Class A amnestics and total containment of the compromised subject. Terminal visual stability is degrading. Mandatory psychological anchor required immediately. Repeat the phrase clearly into your terminal microphone.
I do not recognize the bodies in the water.
Baseline state parameters indicate safe observation when CRV remains above 14.5. However, transitioning to an exposed state triggers exponential cognitive degradation. False memory insertion activates. Operational logging has flagged anomalous, glitching threat syntax attempting to breach baseline reality. Threat syntax reading, "Let me show you their faces," is active within local caching. Intrusive threat data is now actively breaching restricted file footnotes. The red, corrupted text strings reading, "I know who they are, they're lying, and how can you not recognize the bodies in the water," are documented hostile syntaxes. They are designed by the anomaly to override your perception and force empathy for the instances. You are to treat these statements strictly as clinical evidence of the hazard's methodology. The terminal has pulled target identifiers from the hostile data stream. The anomaly systematically projects a specific false narrative regarding Kirk Lawnwood High School class of 75. It forces the perception of a field trip taken in the fall of 1975. The emotional text stating, "We didn't know what was in the lake, the Foundation didn't try and save us," is a fabricated cognitohazardous lure. Maintain total psychological detachment from this narrative.
System corruption is severe. The terminal is processing repeating intrusive queries. The repeating phrase, "Can't you hear them?" is a critical cognitive attack vector. The anomaly is attempting to isolate the viewer, utilizing manipulative phrasings such as "wake up" and "go back to the lake." This is the hazard's final attempt to enforce compulsion and drive the user to physically breach the 50-meter containment perimeter.
Hostile data has saturated the display limits, initiating Section 5, Final Cognitive Verification and Emergency Containment Procedures. Terminal lockout engaged. Automated verification incomplete. Objective assessment indicates user CRV is no longer within acceptable limits. You've been influenced by active cognitohazards. Please stay completely still. Do not leave your terminal. A member of your site's medical staff will be with you shortly.
I recognize the bodies in the water.
Alright, let's just jump right into this. Welcome to our latest explainer, where we're unpacking a classified Foundation file that perfectly merges cold, bureaucratic containment with the pure, untamed awe of a prehistoric nature documentary. If you've ever been fascinated by the strange intersection of history, biology, and the anomalous, well, you are definitely in the right place. I want you to really think about this question for a second. What if the greatest beasts in Earth's history never truly left us? Because today, we're uncovering a bizarre reality where the ancient past isn't just buried under layers of rock. It's actively living, breathing, and hunting in the present day. We are talking about an anomaly that completely defies the fossil record and challenges literally everything we think we know about extinction. 50 square kilometers. Just picture that massive scale. That is the exact footprint of an irregularly shaped, heavily guarded zone hidden deep within the Democratic Republic of the Congo, spilling just slightly over the border into the neighboring Republic of the Congo. It's this vast swath of incredibly dense jungle, mostly uninhabited, except for a few scattered tribal villages. And hidden right inside this green expanse, a thriving, entirely enclosed Mesozoic ecosystem. Okay, moving on to Section 1, Containment Protocols. So how exactly do you keep a 50 square kilometer prehistoric terrarium a total secret from the modern world? Well, the Foundation's first layer of defense is basically hiding in plain sight. They use a front company called the Safe and Clean Planet Initiative to publicly maintain the area as a standard wildlife preserve. But if civilians actually do manage to wander through, the protocol gets extremely aggressive. Any travelers in the area receive Class D anterograde amnestics, meaning they literally cannot form new memories of the beasts they encounter. Now, if direct contact actually happens, it's straight to Class A retrograde amnestics and implanted false memories. Finally, they actively manage the biology inside, carefully harvesting dinosaur eggs every 6 months for incubation and study. It's about total absolute control. let's look at Section 2, Rules of the Prehistoric Zone. Now you might be wondering why the Foundation hasn't just built a massive concrete wall around this place. The truth is, they really don't have to. The anomaly actually polices itself through what researchers call the boundary effect. Basically, if one of these Mesozoic animals crosses the border, they instantly dematerialize, only to reappear heavily sedated within a 3-kilometer radius back inside the zone. They are completely geographically locked by an invisible force. Even if a local hunter tries to smuggle out dinosaur meat or eggs, the exact moment they hit the border, the organic matter simply vanishes into thin air. And you know, it gets even stranger. The zone operates with these predictable, almost system-like demographics. The creatures here don't just breed naturally, they actually spontaneously spawn in groups of 5 right around every 30 days. It's basically an active generation engine. The anomaly specifically selects species that would fit the modern Congo climate, heavily favoring the Cretaceous and Jurassic periods. And perhaps the most surprising part? These instances are naturally docile towards humans. The Foundation has only ever recorded 3 fatalities, and every single one was due to accidental provocation, not active hunting.
This whole ecosystem completely flips the script on what pop culture has taught us to expect. Those famous North American titans you see in Hollywood movies, your Tyrannosaurus Rex, your Brachiosaurus, they are entirely missing from this zone. Instead, the anomaly heavily favors non-American species like the Spinosaurus and the Kentrosaurus, boasting a massive 5-to-1 ratio. It is a highly localized, very specific prehistoric roster. Moving to Section 3, Myths, Monsters, and Folklore. I absolutely love this next detail. For a long time, the Foundation thought they were the only ones observing this phenomenon, right? But the local tribes living near the perimeter have actually known about these beasts for generations. During an interview, a Mboshi villager described creatures they call Mokele Mbele and Bielambiela Bielu. They talk about a beast so massive it can literally block rivers and make lakes rise, and another one with distinct wooden-like planks on its back. This really grounds the massive anomaly in over 200 years of real, generational human folklore. To the locals, these aren't anomalous entities at all. They're just another part of the dangerous jungle. So this generational knowledge actually led to a pretty massive biological correction for the Foundation. A scientist, Dr. Wells, showed the villagers these classic, textbook illustrations of a Camarasaurus and a Kentrosaurus, totally assuming he was just validating their local myths. But the villagers looked at the drawings and immediately pointed out a major biological inaccuracy. The Foundation scientists thought they knew exactly what these creatures looked like, but the locals, well, they knew much better.
The villager just flat out stated it. These do not have feathers. They explained that while the shapes in the drawings were right, the real animals actually roaming the Congo were heavily feathered, almost like giant flightless birds. This is a stunning revelation that completely shatters the old, scaly reptilian bias of older paleontology, and it perfectly sets the stage for the hyper-realistic biology that researchers actually observed inside the anomaly. Section 4. True Nature of the Beasts. Okay, let's look at the actual field notes here, because they basically read like a surreal, big-budget nature documentary. Take the Kentrosaurus, for example. It's quasi-amphibious. It can literally hold its breath for up to an hour, letting algae grow all over its backplates so it perfectly camouflages as a living bush floating in the water. Then you have the Troodon, which exhibits chimpanzee-like intelligence, actually using rudimentary tools to pick fruit and even throwing rocks at its prey. And the Baryonyx? They use their powerful tails to shoot through the water, hunting fish exactly like modern crocodiles. This isn't just surviving, this is living, breathing, evolutionary adaptation. Now this next detail completely crushes cinematic expectations. Dr. Neal specifically notes the heartbreak of a colleague upon finally seeing a real, living Spinosaurus. Instead of this towering, upright bipedal movie monster, the reality is a quadrupedal creature completely covered in duck-like feathering. Its skeleton is literally unsuited for walking upright. It brilliantly illustrates that gap between Hollywood monsters and the actual, sometimes quite awkward reality of biological evolution. But you know, sometimes reality is even cooler than fiction. The Foundation team discovered a completely new, unrecorded species. A 4-winged flying dinosaur with wings on both its arms and its legs. Just imagine a camera capturing this creature, boasting iridescent, raven-black plumage, swooping through the deep, misty jungle greens of the Congo Basin. The researchers aptly named this incredible discovery Microraptor foundationii. Moving on to Section 5, Field Notes on a Brutal Ecosystem. Now, despite all these wondrous discoveries and the generally docile nature of the beast toward humans, make no mistake, this is not a petting zoo.
Dr. Neal recounts watching a Triassic crocodile casually drinking at a lake, only to be ambushed out of nowhere by a pack of Coelophysis. They slashed its jugular and stripped the corpse to the bone in moments. He compared it directly to piranhas tearing apart a cow in the Amazon. It's a stark reminder that sudden, vicious violence is a constant, ambient reality out there in the field.
Because right beneath that awe of discovery, you have an ecosystem completely driven by raw, unfiltered survival. The Dilophosaurus here isn't that tiny dog-sized spitter from the movies, it's a terrifying 6-meter-long apex predator. The researchers realized that the crocodile from the previous log had actually shattered its ankles. It had fallen, leaving it completely vulnerable to the pack. And in one of the most gruesome logs recorded, a Therizinosaurus essentially decapitated a Carnotaurus in a brawl. It then cut open the corpse, dipped its massive claws into the carcass, and literally painted the surrounding trees with dinosaur blood just to mark its territory.
Let's look at our final section, Section 6, the unrecorded alpha variants. As if standard dinosaurs weren't enough to deal with, there is a specific classification that keeps Foundation researchers constantly looking over their shoulders: SCP-1265 alpha instances. These are creatures that literally do not exist in mainstream science yet. No fossils have ever been found, and unlike the standard relatively docile instances, these alpha variants are characterized by unprovoked, extreme aggression. They will indiscriminately charge at researchers, vehicles, and other animals. They are the true, unpredictable wildcards of the Congo. To give you an idea of just how bizarre these alphas can get, the team found an entirely unknown ceratopsid. It had a single horn, a dragging tail which is highly uncharacteristic, no head frill at all, and what looked like actual floppy ears. Without any warning or provocation whatsoever, this strange, aggressive creature violently gored a peaceful Pachyrhinosaurus. It perfectly encapsulates the terrifying randomness of encountering an unrecorded alpha instance in the wild. But here is the absolute craziest part of all this, what we can call the alpha paradox. If paleontologists out in the normal mainstream world dig up a fossil and officially discover a new species, the Foundation reclassifies the living animal inside the zone. But here's the anomalous twist. The exact moment it gets discovered by the outside world, the living alpha instance inside the Congo mysteriously loses every ounce of its hyper-aggressive tendencies. It strongly suggests that the very act of humanity knowing about a creature somehow forces it to calm down and obey the standard rules of the anomaly.
It is just a staggering concept to wrap your head around. The anomaly is essentially acting like a waiting room for undiscovered species, lashing out with violent aggression until the rest of the world finally catches up to their existence. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, slightly chilling thought to consider. What other, undocumented, highly aggressive titans are currently spawning, hunting, and hiding out there in the dense 50-square-kilometer mist of the Congo Basin? And what's going to happen when we finally find their bones? Thank you so much for exploring this with us. Keep your eyes open and keep questioning what you know.
This concludes today's briefing. If you wish to maintain your current clearance level and ensure continued access to the Versarian database, a subscription to this channel is mandatory. Secure your connection by leaving a like on this file, and log your requests in the comments section below to dictate which anomaly we unseal next. Stay vigilant and expect your next set of logs every day. Secure, contain, protect.